Hello everyone! In this video I'm going to teach you how to solve Knights and Knaves puzzles. So these are a very classic type of logic puzzle. They were popularized by Raymond Smullyan, who wrote many books about these and other logic puzzles. And the great thing about these puzzles is that they're going to help you practice constructing logical arguments. They're going to help you to think clearly about evaluating logical statements and forming negations of statements, and really get you to internalize those concepts. So they're a really valuable learning tool, and I'm going to go over how to solve them in this video. So the first thing is the basic setup. What are you doing in these puzzles? So we're on an island where everyone is a knight or a knave, but never both. So the knights can only say true statements, and the knaves can only say false statements. Okay, so the object of the puzzle is, in each puzzle you're going to approach a different group of islanders, and some of them are going to make statements to you. So your job is to figure out the identity, whether they're a knight or knave, of every person in the group. So just to be clear, there's no predetermined number of knights and knaves in any group. They could be all knights, all knaves, some knights, some knaves. It really doesn't matter. They could be anything. So let's go ahead and look at an example just to give you the idea. So you approach a pair of islanders, A and B. A says, I am a knave, or B is a knave. And B actually says nothing. So I want you to pause the video and think about this for a while. What are A and B? There is actually only one identity that either of them could be. So pause the video for a bit and think about, can A be a knight? Can A be a knave? Could B be a knight? Could B be a knave? What would actually make sense? Okay, so now let's go over the solution. So this is one way to solve the puzzle. There's always multiple ways to solve these puzzles, but I'll go over one way with you. So let's go ahead and suppose that A is a knave, and let's just see if that would make sense or not. Let's see if it would make sense for A to be a knave. Well, if A were a knave, then A's statement would have to be false, because knaves only make false statements. Okay, so what does it mean for A's statement to be false? So you have to be careful here. Form the logical negation of A's statement. If A is lying, then A is saying an or statement, so both parts have to be false. The negation of an or statement is an and statement, where both parts are negated. So that would mean that A is a knight and B is a knight. So they would have to be the opposite of what A is saying. Okay, so when you negate a phrase like B is a knave, you can just say B is a knight instead of saying B is not a knave. You can just say B is a knight. It's faster. So now what? Well, this doesn't make sense, right? Because we already supposed that A is a knave, and now we're finding that would mean that A is a knight. That doesn't make any sense. This is a contradiction. Okay. Okay, so basically it's impossible for A to be a knave. So A must be a knight. All right, so we're halfway done. We got A's identity. Now how about B? Can you figure out B? Think about this for a minute. Pause it and think about it. All right, well, since A is a knight, A's statement must be true. Knights only say true statements. But when you look at A's statement, the first part says, I am a knave. Well, that part is definitely not true, right? But it is just half of an or statement. So for an or statement to be true, you can have one part be true or the other part be true, or both parts be true. In this case, the first part is definitely false. But the overall statement must be true. So we need the second half. The second half must be true in order for the overall statement to be true. So we can go ahead and conclude the second part of A's statement is true, meaning that B is a knave. All right, so at this point we have solved the puzzle. Sometimes these puzzles are a little long, and I like to actually kind of underline or highlight things that I have found to really be true, so that I don't lose track of what is true and what was just a guess that I was sort of following up on. So sometimes I'll do this kind of thing. So now I want to talk about the technique that we actually just used in that puzzle solution. So this technique is called proof by contradiction. So this is a really powerful technique for solving problems. And so what you do is you suppose that something is true, and you say, well, what would happen if it was true? What would the consequences of that be? So there's only kind of two things that can really happen as you investigate all of the consequences of your supposition. You keep investigating more and more and more. You find a consequence, then you find the consequences of that consequence. You sort of push it as far as you can go. And then one of two things is going to happen. Well, the first thing is what you saw already. Maybe we find a contradiction. We find something to be true that is absolutely impossible. If that's the case, then you know that your supposition cannot be correct because it leads to something that is impossible, and the impossible things can't be reality. It really doesn't matter what the impossibility was. It could be a contradiction between your original supposition and one of the consequences, or it could be a contradiction between two of the consequences. It really doesn't matter. Just anything that is impossible. So at that point, you have proven that whatever you supposed cannot be true. So you've proven that whatever you supposed is actually false. Now, the other thing that can happen is maybe you don't find a contradiction. And in that case, you really can't conclude anything. You might find that your supposition was true. That could be what the reason for not getting a contradiction is. Or maybe you just couldn't find a contradiction. Like maybe you just didn't look hard enough, or maybe it just wasn't obvious enough. You really can't conclude anything either way. So you're starting out with this guess, basically. It's a guess. This supposition is a guess at what might be the truth, but you have no reason to suppose that it really is true or that it really is false unless you find a contradiction. So in that case, you just have to try something else. So hopefully the logic here makes sense to you guys of how this technique works. It's really more profound than you might think. So just let's linger on this for a little while, how this technique works. What you're doing when you suppose some statement, like when you suppose that A is a knight, is you're basically stepping into an imaginary universe. You're saying, what if this was the real world, where A is a knight, or where A is a knave, or whatever? You're saying, what would happen if this was the truth? And you're entering into this hypothetical universe. You don't know if this universe is the real world or if it's just your imagination, if it's just a little bubble that's going to pop. But you step in there and you say, okay, let me look around and see if this looks like reality to me. Does this look like the world that I'm familiar with? But the thing is that no matter how familiar it looks, and no matter how many things you find there that make sense, you can never really be sure that it is the real world, that it is the truth, because there's infinite consequences of whatever you find. The world that you step into is too big to fully explore. But if you find something in there that does not make sense, that is really impossible, then you can be sure that it's not the real world, right? Have you guys seen the movie Inception? It's kind of like that. Like you're stepping into another world, you don't know if it's real or not, but if you find something that's impossible, then it can't be the real world. And at that point, your hypothetical little bubble universe, it just pops. And unfortunately, at that point, that means that all of the things that you investigated there, all of the things that you found out, all of those consequences that you carefully documented of your original guess, none of those are trustworthy anymore. You have to throw them all away. And that can feel like kind of a loss. But at least you do gain one real good solid piece of information, which is that your guess, your supposition was false. Okay, so like for example, looking at the solution that we did, when we supposed that A was a knave, one of the things that we found out from that was that B was a knight. But as soon as we found out that this whole paragraph here, this whole little hypothetical universe was not the real world, was wrong, we can't use the fact that B was a knight anymore, right? All we can take away from that experience is that our supposition was wrong and that A was a knight because of that. And in fact, we found out later that actually B was a knave as well. Okay, so let's move along and let's look at another example. So in this one, we will talk to 3 islanders. So A says B is a knave and C is a knight. B says C is a knight and A is a knight. And C says nothing. The reason the Last Islander is always saying nothing is because of the website I used to generate these puzzles. Has it just always generated that way. These are actually really hard to write by yourself because if you just write down some random statements, that will almost certainly be unsolvable. All right, so let's look at the solution. So there's a number of things that I could guess here. I could guess that A is a knight. I could guess that A is a knave. I could guess that B is a knight or a knave. But there's only two good guesses to start with. So if we look at the two statements that we have from A and B, they are both and statements. So if I were to guess that either B or A was a knave, then I would have to form the negation of the and statements. And so that would give me an or statement. But if you have an or statement to work with, that really doesn't tell you very much because you don't know which part is supposed to be true, right? You don't know whether the first part is supposed to be true, the second part, both parts. So you really want to make guesses where you get an and statement right away to work with. So a good guess in this case would be either that A is a knight or that B is a knight. So I'm going to go ahead and guess that B is a knight. So let's see what happens. Suppose that B is a knight. So now I've entered my hypothetical universe and I'm going to investigate and see whether I think this is the real world. So B being a knight means that B's statement is true. So I'll go ahead and just write B's statement. Okay, B has told me that A is a knight. I mean, he also said C is a knight, but C doesn't have anything to say, so I can't really use that. But now I have that A is a knight, so I'm going to go ahead and say, well, A must be telling the truth. And A's statement being true means that I can just use A's statement. Okay, now I found something that doesn't make sense, right? I supposed that B was a knight, but now I found that B is a knave. That doesn't make sense. Now that I have a contradiction, I know this hypothetical universe is not the real one, so I can conclude that my original supposition that B is a knight was wrong. So B cannot be a knight, that means B must be a knave. Okay, so I've solved 1/3 of the puzzle. I know that B is a knave. Now that I know B is a knave, I actually know that B's statement is false, so let's see if that tells me anything useful. So let's form the negation of B's statement. That would be C is a knave or A is a knave. So you switch each person's identity and you switch the word and an or to the opposite. Now, does this get me anywhere? I know that B is a knave. I know that C is a knave or A is a knave, but it's just an or statement. So I don't know which part is supposed to be true. I can't conclude anything from that. Okay, so we have to try something else. So let's try another guess. So I said originally that guessing A is a knight would be a good place to start. So now let's try that. Okay, so that gives us an and statement from A to work with. So let's look at A's statement. Okay, so the first part does agree with what we already know. We said that B is a knave, and we're certain of that because we confirmed it with the proof by contradiction. But what about the second half of A's statement here, that C is a knight? I don't really know what C is, so how can I find a contradiction here? Well, actually, if you think about it, another thing that we did find out was this. This information right here, this was not based on a guess. This was based on something certain that we already knew. We knew that B is a knave, and so B's statement has to be false. But when you look at B's statement, that implies that C is a knave or A is a knave. And now look at this guess that we're in down here. We've supposed that A is a knight, and that led to C being a knight. So in fact, wouldn't that make B's statement true? Because that's exactly what B says. B says C is a knight and A is a knight. So in this situation, this makes B's statement true. However, we already confirmed that B is a knave. So this is a contradiction. It's a contradiction with the already confirmed reality that B is a knave. So A is a knave. and that is definite information. Okay, so we know that A is a knave and B is a knave. Well, how are we going to figure out what C is? Well, we already looked at the consequences of B being a knave, so now let's look at the consequences of A being a knave. Since A is a knave, A's statement has to be false. And A's statement being false means we should form the negation of A's statement. The negation is B is a knight or C is a knave. Well, we know that the first half of that is not true, right? B is not a knight. So in order for that or statement to be true as a whole, we need the second half to be true. So C is a knave. And notice here that I was not looking for a contradiction because I was not making a guess. I was following up on definite information. A is a knave, so A's statement is false. All right, so we have solved the puzzle. So now I'm going to go over some tips and tricks to make sure that you can effectively solve these puzzles without getting mixed up and chasing your own tail. All right, so let me go over the best strategies for solving these. So first of all, you're going to start by supposing that someone is a something, but don't make a random guess. Choose strategically what your first supposition is going to be, and for the rest of them as well. You definitely want to get an and statement right away because that is the only type of statement that you can follow up on, okay? If you just get an or statement, you can't follow up on that at all. If you just get an if-then statement, you'll only be able to follow up when you know that the if part is true. So you really want to get an and statement right away. So these are the ways to get an and statement. If someone just says an and statement, try supposing that they're a knight. On the other hand, if someone says an or statement, try supposing they're a knave, because then their negation will be an and statement. If someone says an if-then statement, remember the negation of an if-then statement is an and statement. It's not another if-then, it's an and statement. So you can suppose they are a knave, so you get their negation. And finally, if someone says an if and only if statement, I would hold off on guessing anything about them until you've collected more information later on. And that's because an if and only if statement asserts that both parts of the statement have the same truth value, but it doesn't assert which truth value that is. So you have to wait until you know the truth value of at least half of their statement before you can start making a guess about them. Now, just to remind you, if someone is a knight, when you suppose someone is a knight, you can use their statement, follow up on it. On the other hand, when you suppose that someone is a knave, or when you find that someone is a knave, you can use the negation of their statement and follow up with that. So it's really important, because you're going to be making a lot of negations, it's really important that you form your negations correctly. This is a really common mistake in these problems, is to do them incorrectly. So remember, the negation of an and is like this. So if I say, part one of a statement and part two of a statement, when I negate that, it's going to become not part one or not part two, okay? Where part one and part two are whatever they said, okay? And then for an or statement, when I have part one or part two, the negation of that is going to be the negation of each part with an and between them. The negation of an if-then statement, if someone says if part one, then part two. The negation of an if-then is to confirm, to assert that the first part is true and the second part is false. So it's an and statement. Don't get those mixed up. And then finally, for an if and only if statement, these are a little bit trickier to work with in the original true version and in the negated version. So let me put them on their own bullet point here. So when an if and only if statement, which is also abbreviated IFF, when that is true, that simply means that the two parts have the same truth value, but you don't know which truth value until you've figured out what one of them is. So they could both be true or they could both be false. When an if and only if statement is false, or when you form the negation of it, that means the two parts have opposite truth values. But you don't know which one has the truth and which one is false, okay? So you have to be careful with those. Now, another thing to keep in mind with these knights and knaves puzzles is that you don't always have to get the answers by making suppositions and finding contradictions. Once you've proved someone's identity, you can keep using that information for the rest of the puzzle in whatever way it's useful to you. Once you've confirmed something is true, you can keep using that. Finally, another way to solve these that is sometimes useful, as you saw in the last example, is if you have enough information to evaluate someone's statement as being false, then that means they have to be a knave. And if you have enough information to evaluate their statement as being true, then they must be a knight. So sometimes you can get their identities that way. Okay, so that is all the tips and tricks for solving these, and now I'm going to do one last example with you before I turn you loose on some of these puzzles. So in this puzzle, we're going to look at 3 islanders. I always call them A, B, and C. You can give them your own names if you want, like, I don't know, Alan, Beatrix, and Cedric. In this puzzle, A says B is a knight if and only if C is a knave. So we're doing the ifs in this puzzle. And B says if C is a knight, then A is a knight. Okay, so what is a good starting guess here? There's only one good starting guess. Never start by guessing about an if and only if. You will not get anywhere. Okay, you have to start with the other one. And it's no good to guess that B is telling the truth, because that wouldn't tell us anything either. If B is telling the truth, that means that if C is a knight, then A is a knight. But that doesn't tell us anything. It only tells us what happens if C is a knight. We have no idea what C is, right? Because as in all the other puzzles, C says nothing. Okay, so the only good starting guess is to guess that B is a knave. So if B is a knave, then B's statement is false, of course. What does it mean for an if-then statement to be false? They can only be false in that one situation when the if part is true and the then part is false. Okay, so when the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false. So here I've asserted that the hypothesis was true and the conclusion was false. All right, now that gives us 2 pieces of information to follow up with. Of course, C has nothing to say, but we can follow up with A being a knave and make the negation of A's statement. So the negation of A's statement, well, actually, you don't really want to write out the negation of an if and only if statement. It's really long and confusing. What you really just want to say is that when you know an if and only if statement is false, just say that the 2 parts have different truth values. And then if you know the truth value of one of them, that means you can figure out the truth value of the other of them. So do we know the truth value of part of A's statement? Let's see. Well, actually, yes, because we already said what B and what C are. We said B is a knave and C is a knight. So actually, we already found that both parts of A's statement are false. But that would make A's statement true. This is a contradiction, right? Because A is a knave. At least in this hypothetical universe, A is a knave. And we found a contradiction, so this hypothetical universe has to go. It's not real. So all this means is that our original supposition, the one that led us into this hypothetical universe, was wrong. Okay, so B cannot be a knave, so B is a knight. And now this is definite true information that we can trust for the rest of the puzzle. All right, so we got one person. How are we going to get the others? We still only have one other statement to work with, so we're going to have to guess something about A. So there's no really good, better guess about an if and only if, so we'll just try one, and if it doesn't work, we'll try the other. So let's suppose that A is a knight. Okay, so when we suppose A is a knight, A says an if and only if statement. And when you suppose that's true, it just means that the 2 parts have the same truth value. And that is only helpful if you know the truth value of one of them. But we do know the truth value of one of them, right? We know the first part is true because the first part is that B is a knight. So that means the second part must be true as well. So C is a knave. All right, well, let's see. Maybe we can find a contradiction, because I didn't find one yet. Maybe we can find a contradiction with B's statement. B has to be telling the truth, right? Is B telling the truth in this situation? Can we evaluate B's statement as true or false? let's see. B says, if C is a knight, then A is a knight. So when the hypothesis of an if-then statement is false, that means it's true overall. So actually B's statement is true. Okay, so I don't see any contradiction. We know B is a knight, and in this situation, B's statement is true. We supposed A is a knight. That didn't lead to any contradictions, so we just got to try the other supposition, which back out of this hypothetical universe. Maybe it's the real world, I don't know. We can't really confirm it, and we'll try a different hypothetical universe. Okay, let's try the opposite guess, that A is a knave. So again, for an if and only if statement, that just means that the two parts have opposite truth values. Now, we already know that the first part of A's statement is true, the part that says B is a knight. So for the two parts to have opposite truth values, the second part must be false. So the second part is C is a knave. For that to be false, C is a knight. Okay. Do you see any contradiction? Actually, there is one, because again, let's look at B's statement. Recall that B is a knight, so B has to tell the truth. So remember, B says, if C is a knight, then A is a knight. But now we've said that C is a knight, and we've also supposed that A is a knave. So this is a contradiction. And again, for any contradiction, all you can conclude is that your original supposition was wrong. So A is a knight. Okay, so we got 2/3 of the puzzle done. Now, how are we going to find out about C? Well, actually, at this point, we have confirmed that the second paragraph here, that hypothetical universe, that actually was the real one, because that started with supposing that A is a knight. So all consequences there that we found from A being a knight, now that we know A is a knight, we can go ahead and use those. So one of the things we found when we supposed A was a knight was that C is a knave. And now that we know A is a knight, we can just follow up with that. If you wanted to, you could also just delete that second paragraph and move it down, down underneath the part where you find out A is a knight, and then sort of conceal the fact that you ever made a mistake. All right, so that is the last example, and if you have any more questions, you can send me a message. These examples, I will put them up so that you can see them, and this whole document as well, so you can see it and reference it when you want to. And I'll talk to you guys later.